Good morning, everyone. Feel free to come off mute just to say hello so we can hear your voices. Let us know where you're calling in from.
Hi there, I'm Jessie Ferreira. I'm calling from Fort Pierce, Florida. I'm with the Solar Energy Loan Fund. Nice to see all of you guys.
Nice, welcome.
Nice to see you, Jessie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi there, Nate Hausman, calling in from Montpelier, Vermont with Inclusive Prosperity Capital.
Welcome, Nate.
Thanks, happy to be here.
Lindsay Robbins says she's calling in from New York with CPC Climate Capital. And Erica Mackey from Grid Alternatives in Truckee. I didn't know you were that close, Erica. I'm in Sacramento.
Yeah, I moved at the beginning of the pandemic
Hmm.
from Oakland.
Yeah. Yeah, I still imagined you in the Bay. Okay, well, let's go ahead and kick things off. So I am Michelle Romero. Oh, and we have Wendy too. Let's let Wendy introduce herself real quick.
Hi, good morning. This is Gwendy Brown, Senior Policy Advisor with Elemental Impact, and excited to be here. Sorry for being late. I'm having some technical issues.
Tell me about it. I was having a flat tire this morning as we tried to get my daughter off to school. So yes, the morning is a struggle for sure for those of us on the West Coast. So, well, welcome everyone. I'm Michelle Romero. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at dream.org. And I wanted to share a little bit more about our organization and how we've been involved in GGRF. But today, this call is really for you. We launched this study in the summer, shortly after the initial business plans were approved. And we know they've been renegotiated, but shortly after they were approved, we wanted to basically hear from folks kind of early indications of how they were thinking about implementing some of the equity commitments and be able to sort of reflect back to you all, to the field, where, there were some strong starting points and where there maybe were some gaps, and offer some thoughts on how we can help and support. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. For those of you who are less familiar with dream.org, dream.org is a national nonprofit organization. And essentially, we dream of a world beyond poverty, pollution, prisons, and polarization. So we really do work at that intersection of racial justice, racial justice, economic justice, and social unity. So kind of we tend to work in a bipartisan way. We do have a footprint in red states and blue states and purple states, and organize with folks in a bipartisan way. But we're really trying to create a more equitable future, and that's what guides us. Our Green for All program has been making an impact since 2007. Originally founded by Van Jones as Green for All, Green for All launched the green jobs movement in the United States to build an inclusive green economy strong enough to really lift people out of poverty. We helped to direct tens of billions of dollars over the years for green workforce development and climate investments for disadvantaged communities through various policies. And we partnered with communities to establish the first in the nation community workforce models in places like Portland, Oregon, for instance, that helped increase minority business contracting and workforce diversity for clean energy projects. In the Inflation Reduction Act, dream.org's early role was, to respond to a lot of those official requests for information and help guide the design of the program so that we were incorporating equity into the program design. We responded to more than 15 official requests for information and helped provide trainings and things like that for the EPA on a few different things. Overall, we shaped 9 programs, 8 tax incentives, and 6 agency initiatives and equity strategies that help impact $41 billion in program dollars. On GGRF specifically, one of the things that we're really proud of is, really getting the EPA to adopt almost all of our recommendations for equity. And when they issued basically that sort of heads up to all the applicants that if you wanted to be competitive to administer GGRF funding, you would need to have a strong plan for disadvantaged communities. And we saw being in those coalitions, how that shifted the conversation for folks that maybe that wasn't their area of expertise to start taking it more seriously and to actually really develop a plan, and then helping some of those folks actually develop their community benefit plans. So we felt it, only made sense then that once we shifted into the implementation side of things, that we could continue to sort of support then making good on those commitments, and being a resource to folks. So the GGRF research project is something that we did in partnership with Miriam Solis, who you will have a chance to meet in just a moment. But the purpose of it really was to sustain that social equity goal momentum, help identify what some of the main priorities and concerns in the GGRF ecosystem are. So again, we interviewed 18 different folks who were directly recipients of GGRF funding, either primes or subrecipients, and helped to generate, what some actionable recommendations could be in response to that, as well as to identify and share some opportunities for collaboration amongst GGRF awardees and dream.org, where we can help. So with that, since we all got to hear a little bit about where you're calling from and your organization, I wanted to hand it over to Miriam to introduce herself and kick things off with our research findings.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the handoff, Michelle. It's really great to meet most of you for the first time. I've actually had the pleasure of speaking with folks at most of your organizations throughout this process, actually, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. My name is Miriam Solis. I was brought on as a consultant for this project. The other hat I wear is that of a community and regional planning faculty member, where I focus on the intersection of environmental justice and equitable economic development. One of the things that we know in my field is that a lot of the times policy and planning initiatives don't have equity commitments. There are also a lot of instances where they do have equity commitments, but policies and plans fail to actualize those commitments. And so the drive behind this project really built on that idea. Are we going to be able to actualize the commitments that organizations have made that were very much inspired by climate justice organizational organizing during the IRA negotiations? And so that's what brings us all together today. As a bit of a roadmap, I've done my introduction, and you've learned more about dream.org. I'm going to say a little about the research process, how the findings of that research process point to what we're currently calling the 5 C's of social equity. These are the insights that are based on what we heard time and time again from the folks that we interviewed. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how dream.org can support equitable GGRF implementation. And what I'm really looking forward to is the Q&A. We're really interested in hearing which findings and ideas or areas for collaboration really resonate, and which you think hold a lot of potential for thinking about how to actualize those equity commitments that have been made in the past couple of years. As a bit of background on the research process, we interviewed 18 organizations, and in this presentation and in the working paper that will be issued in the coming month or so, we are referring to GGRF organizations as those that are the main recipients or the subrecipients of GGRF funding. We also interviewed organizations that have, for example, Solar for All funding, NCIF and CCIA. This included 27 people overall. We spent September and October analyzing the transcripts generated from all of those interviews and then writing up the results. And in November and this December, we're spending the time disseminating the findings. So we're prioritizing those of you who were either interviewees or the organizations that participated in the study, in order to get some of these ideas out and start building on them before we issue this working paper in the coming month. Before we get into the findings, the 5 C's, it's important to state how much enthusiasm our interviewees shared about this huge opportunity to build capacity and have a greater impact. Many organizations, as part of this funding, are expanding their scope, either geographically or the types of projects that they're working on. But time and time again, we did hear that there is widespread concern that equity is being relegated. So it's important to take this moment to understand where those threats exist in order to proactively address them. As one interviewee put it, it's almost a gold rush feeling. So there's a rush to low-hanging fruit, and everybody will be forgetting about what this is about. And that the huge challenge is going to be to stay true to those original commitments and to invest GGRF funds where the money makes the most difference. The first C that emerged in the findings as a theme is the idea of coordination and collaboration. What we heard from most organizations is that because of these funds, in the pre-funding moment, and certainly in the last couple of months, GGRF organizations have been actively building their own organizational capacity. This has at times presented some really important HR challenges. Some organizations are doubling in size and thinking about creative ways to find the talent needed to implement their business plan. Because there are a lot of similar procedures that GGRF organizations have to undertake, there is a huge interest in wanting to continue to coordinate and collaborate across organizations. And you can imagine how, for the smaller organizations in particular, this growth in both organizational capacity and scope can be particularly challenging. It may not be as challenging for the large organizations, but for those smaller ones, there was a particular emphasis placed on the need to coordinate and collaborate. And this challenge for GGRF organizations was shaped by an additional set of dynamics. So we could say that at this point, GGRF as a whole may face particular challenges because of the change in administration. But in some geographic contexts where local and state government support has also not been historically supportive of climate finance initiatives, there is some anticipation around the lack of political support and how that might affect implementation. There's also some concern about a potential waning culture of collaboration amongst GGRF organizations. So many spoke so positively of the collaboration that existed leading up to the adoption of GGRF, but now because there are some overlapping scopes in terms of where organizations want to carry out their work, the type of work that they're going to do, there's a concern that organizations may actually grow increasingly competitive. And as you can imagine, that's going to particularly hurt the smaller organizations. And there was also a concern expressed by several organizations about the role that the larger GGRF organizations were undertaking in leading top-down decision-making processes. So the smaller organizations or those newer to the network were experiencing an ethos of mandates being passed down or being left out of early implementation discussions as a whole. As one interviewee from a small organization pointed out, there is the time and cost of compliance, procurement, measurement, reporting, verification, underlying legal costs. There are so many ways in which organizations can be collaborating and sharing costs. So with regard to this in particular, we recommend prioritizing building internal capacity to ensure program sustainability. That's going to be very important, but that ought to happen through a culture of collaboration with an eye toward how the smaller organizations ought to use this opportunity in particular to build their capacity. We recommend adopting horizontal or bottom-up decision-making processes, structuring convenings to reflect social equity priorities, and NCIF-led information sharing systems and supports. The second C pertains to community partnerships, and we heard about community partnerships in a few different ways. First of all, we heard for most folks that this is something that they really want to prioritize. Many organizations committed to community partnerships in their business plans. But again, there are some threats in this area. One of them pertains to the role of small developers and contractors. What we heard from folks is that there are established developers and contractors who are likely to become the go-tos because they have the existing capacity, the back office supports, the experience. But if we're thinking about if we're wanting to take market transformation seriously, then we have to seriously engage the idea that this is a very important time to engage and build the capacity of small developers and contractors. Another way in which we heard about this area is that a lot of the existing networks don't have the cultural competency or the experience of working in historically marginalized communities. So there needs to be an intentional focus on building the capacity among existing small developers and contractors in order to do that. We also heard about the recognition of existing community-based organizations that are already trusted, that can advance climate finance goals because they are the direct line to communities. And one of the ways in which this plays out is their ability to translate program goals in ways that address the history of exploitation that finance has had in communities. However, there are concerns about organizations' ability to develop meaningful partnerships with communities. And many actually have very limited experience in sustaining structured partnerships with community-based organizations. Interestingly, community governance was mentioned as an idea in several business plans, but we actually heard very little about transformative community governance models. And so in the area of community partnerships, we're recommending building the capacity of culturally competent small developers and contractors through partnerships, formalizing community-based organizational partnerships, and clarifying and pursuing community governance goals. We heard quite a bit about communications. The overarching need to enhance public awareness of GGRF, particularly, as you might imagine, in this moment. Storytelling efforts as being central to communicate the impact of the program. We also heard about the importance of climate finance needing to be reframed to speak directly to historically marginalized communities' realities and priorities. As one person put it, we haven't quite figured out how to phrase this in a way that people will say, oh, I got it. This is really helping my family, my household, my children, my grandchildren. So in this particular area, we're recommending communication strategies across scales, a boots on the ground approach, kitchen table conversations, but also communication strategies at larger scales that communicate the overall impact of the program. The fourth C we identified in analyzing the transcripts is this idea of capitalization, which again, its relevance to equity and potential threats to equity plays out in a few different ways. For being a program about market transformation, we heard limited discussion of transformative loan products. And we heard that there's a concern that community lenders were being left out of these early stages of implementation. And they are going to be so central when it comes to community transformation. We heard about the need to align capital, about the needed capital alignment at the lender and consumer interfaces. So there are a lot of programs available at various scales in some places, some more than others, and there's a need to align those opportunities. And organizations, again, particularly the smaller ones, anticipate some challenges in leveraging private capital. One interviewee put it very explicitly, we are not ready. It was fine to say that when we were campaigning for the money, but now that we have the money, we've got to stop saying we're ready. The rush to get the money out because we will have to find credit-ready projects. It's going to be wealthier, wider folks. They are ready. In the area of capitalization, we recommend clarifying how loan products reflect market transformation goals, adopting business models to strengthen and enhance community lender roles, aligning different climate finance programs, and using the full GGRF timeline. So there's the challenge of speed, or the pressure that organizations are feeling, but in order to actualize these equity commitments, the full GGRF timeline will need to be used. In this area of compliance, which is our 5th C, we found that a concern amongst some organizations are the EPA terms and conditions. There's some lack of clarity and rigidity. We heard quite a bit about Build America, Buy America, and Davis Bacon. This affects or this manifests as a challenge when it comes to the limited supply chain. And this is something that particularly affects small developers and lenders. They may lack compliance experience, for example. And we also heard about the need to better understand impact. And this isn't what we learned is that folks understand that this plays out in the form of KPIs, for example, the quantification of program implementation, but there's also a need to understand population level analyses and qualitative long-term impacts on communities. One example of that need is that some projects may spur gentrification and displacement. Interviews also pointed out to restrictive definitions of equity. So when it comes to compliance, there is a recognition that a lot of these market transformation goals are aligned. There's the need to be intentional about the supply chain in order to build a distributed clean energy economy. That can happen intentionally, slowly, and deliberately by working with these smaller community partners by building their capacity. The recommendations that we have for this area are partnerships with trade unions and other organizations that have federal compliance experience, working through workforce development organizations to identify projects. GGRF organizations ought to share resources and information pertaining to compliance. And we actually, when it came to Build America, Buy America, and Davis Bacon, we heard about plans to use workarounds for these. And we do want to caution against that and have that be a measure of last resort when not done in collaboration with communities. We also recommend using inter and intra-organizational resources to assess impact. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Miriam. Before I launch into how dream.org can align with some of the recommendations and support those areas, I'd love to just pause the recording for a minute and hear from you all, what resonates from that and now post-election, right? If there's anything new or that you feel is different or kind of keeps you up at night. So how dream.org can support equitable GGRF implementation as an implementation partner. Around coordination and collaboration, one of the things that we heard over and over, right, was just the importance of collaborating across GGRF recipients. But obviously you all have a lot on your plates, and it did seem like, everyone was sort of almost building their organizations or growing their organizations from scratch or in new ways that presented a lot of operational challenges. And so that, I think, just by nature of the beast, and then you add on top of that the political context now, gives you a lot. I think that even when coordination and collaboration is an intent, it's something that can easily fall by the wayside. And so I did just want to flag that, this is an area that dream.org can support if folks need a facilitator or a convener or someone to just sort of be the glue and help keep a collaborative project moving forward. So convening across GGRF recipients may include, identifying what's commonly needed, project managing joint collaborations, or convening and facilitation support. A past example of where we've done something like this is during the Obama administration at the very end of it, as he was rolling out the Clean Power Plan, we led and developed a 10-member coalition of organizations with different sets of expertise to co-create state implementation plan toolkits. So at that time, the administration was sort of dictating what the goals were for each state to hit, but each state was going to have to produce, how they sort of met those climate reduction goals, if you will. And we knew that there were a lot of policy choice points, a lot of decisions that would need to be made, and some guidance, and certainly guidance and recommendations around equitable implementation. And so we helped to sort of project manage and divide out, kind of leveraging everyone's skills and expertise, how to produce one set of cohesive recommendations for folks that then everyone could use. We built the central website to house those shared resources, secured legal expert reviewers, and all of that sort of thing to sort of make it manageable for everyone to engage. We're also in the technical assistance area. So we have been working with local communities across the country, especially in places like Pittsburgh, Detroit, San Diego, to identify projects that could actually compete for funding and help people along the way understand, A, what the GGRF funding opportunities are, how to navigate and prepare for those opportunities, and provide them a variety of technical assistance that has been needed. What we found is that while the projects are unique, right, there are some standard technical assistance needs that a lot of folks have. And so we sort of fleshed out what we think is, project development, phase 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and kind of define those for us internally, and built a virtual one-stop shop for technical assistance, which will launch hopefully at the end of January or early February, to help cities and community leaders advance their ideas through project development and some of those common, climate finance questions and challenges that they do have. What we found from doing a landscape analysis of the technical assistance landscape is that while there are a lot of great tools out there, the accessibility and availability of them sometimes varies based on market. And also, we don't want duplication, right? None of us has time to reinvent the wheel over and over. And so by just pulling from what some of that best, those best tools and resources are that are out there, and providing a virtual one-stop shop, we could help to streamline the experience for the folks who need to access this. So the format will be online and self-paced with biweekly life group coaching and consulting support from experts that will be available during those sessions. The curriculum initially will include project identification and planning, navigating climate finance, community engagement best practices, and community benefit agreements, along with other things as it evolves. And again, the idea is not that we are the expert on everything. It's to sort of curate the expertise that does exist and provide a convenient, seamless, accessible experience for folks who need it. The under community partnerships, so the Dream Entrepreneurs Network is definitely a way to help diversify supply chains. We have brought together a network of Black and Brown minority-owned businesses in the climate space. We have over 40 diverse-owned companies currently, and we provide them ongoing professional development opportunities, lobbying opportunities, and networking opportunities, but also tailored programming and services that help them specifically access capital and contracts. The idea when we launched this initiative 2 years ago was to say, okay, knowing that there is going to be this moment of climate investment, but also this sort of catalyst into this new economy in a quicker way, or at this phase that we're at, we need to really ready Black and Brown owners to participate and to seize the economic opportunity to be ready for the moment. It is an economic shift, and so that's something we like to highlight and remind folks, is that it's not only about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that this is an economic shift. And so we want to make sure that we're building an inclusive green economy. An example of a tailored programming that we provide is our Launchpad. Early on, we were providing investor readiness training for early stage climate startups and help them connect to investors. There are a lot of innovative companies that came out of that, and I'll talk about one in a couple of slides from now. But we are shifting that program a little bit as we enter this next phase, and I'll explain that as well. A second example, we can go to the next slide, is providing support to access loans and funding and finance. And so one of the ways that we did that is with OpConnect. So Dexter Turner, the CEO of OpConnect, we've helped him prepare and advance an application for $250 million Department of Energy loan. And it's to support fleet electrification in low-income disadvantaged communities with microgrids. We help with site identification and overcoming some of those financial challenges for a minority-owned business or a smaller business to even be able to compete for funding. So support through the engineering review process and some of those hurdles he had to overcome. He is now at the final stage with hundreds of sites in 30 states identified. We're trying to make this final push, obviously, before the administration changes to get that approved. If it's approved later this year, he would become the first African American ever to receive DOE loan funding. And so those are some of the ways that we're helping overcome some barriers to really unlock major opportunities. On the compliance side, so a couple of things. I mentioned the Launchpad as one of our programs that supports our Dream Entrepreneur Network. We are going to be evolving that into a 2.0 version of the program. So hearing again what some of those needs are from this and from the experiences of our members around compliance, and then also just, if we're successful at helping them get things like this $250 million loan or GGRF loan funding, right? There are going to be new sets of compliance and rules that they'll need to be able to be prepared for and know how to do. And so the 2.0 program this coming year is going to focus specifically with pre-growth and those growth stage companies to learn how to win federal contracts and loans, but also be compliant capable. And then the second piece here that you see is highlighting Frontline Gig. Frontline Gig is one of the startups that came through our initial Launchpad Accelerator program where we provided investor readiness training. Kala Fleming is the CEO of Frontline Gig, and Frontline Gig helps to provide an AI-assisted workforce development app to strengthen the workforce development field and bring more underrepresented talent and non-traditional talent into that ecosystem. So obviously we want good green jobs. Some of those, require then that you have union jobs and that we protect sort of union, quality jobs and just have good career paying jobs and that sort of thing. The reality is some folks, let's say coming home from prison, aren't necessarily ready to just sort of go and get a job or eligible to go and do that. What we want to be able to do is help people go from gig work to career work. And so this AI-assisted workforce development app helps them, anyone basically connect to a green gig and work and kind of keep them busy through those jobs that are needed, but tracks their performance, is able to sort of indicate, who's showing up on time, who is being recognized, by those supervisors and things like that, and then start to offer them supervisory opportunities or more responsibilities that can help to build their resume and their skill set into other career opportunities. And so we're piloting this tool in the city of Pittsburgh next year, hopefully with some government funding that we are waiting to get approved. And the idea is to work with the workforce development ecosystem that is there. And like I said, provide that connective tissue so that, again, it's a seamless experience for people who are looking for work in the green economy and can also broaden the pool from which we're bringing folks into those career pathways. All right, so on the communications front, we heard that communicating what the benefits are from these dollars, what do the investments go toward, is obviously was always going to be a PR challenge, and helping the masses sort of understand the benefits, build support behind these climate investments and that sort of thing. Obviously a bigger challenge now And one, too, that requires a very nonpartisan approach that can do this. And so I wanted to just share, one of the things that we did back in 2018. So again, this was during the first Trump administration, was to launch the Moms Mobilize campaign in response to Trump's effort to roll back the US EPA budget. So at the time, he had proposed a 31% budget cut for the EPA. And the conversation was very partisan still. It was shortly after, the election and all that. Things were still pretty heated. And what we realized as the environmental community was sort of debating what a win could look like, well, if we got them down to 10%, that sort of thing, we just said, take a step back. Like, we actually just need a whole new messaging strategy. And thought that if we could elevate an ordinary hero, someone that anyone could relate to, right, that was not about the parties or the politics, or thinking about things from the headspace, and could tap in a little bit more to the heart, then we could maybe help people understand what the EPA does, what these dollars are for, and give us reason to want, to fight for them. And so the Moms Mobilize campaign organized women from frontline communities who raise their kids in places that are polluted, to Hollywood elite women, so Ashley Judd, Ellen Pompeo, Alfre Woodard, some of your celebrities and recognizable folks and faces, signed a joint letter to the women in Congress saying, please don't let this happen. And then we had kitchen table conversations with some of the moms who are raising their kids in communities that are overrun by pollution. And we filmed those. And we had them just talk about what it's like and what the impacts are, and how these kinds of funds can help, and how some of the EPA efforts can help. And we partnered with ATTN, so Attention, one of the digital video distributors, to help reach millions of people that way. And then partnered also with Moms Clean Air Force on a lobby day in DC, where folks were then, able to, Barbara Lee came out and said, yeah, I've got the amendments in hand, we're going to do this, and so sort of created that type of communications effort. And so there's a case study link there for folks. We can share the slides later. But as far as the Inflation Reduction Act, we also have started to capture some photojournalism stories to help uplift, the importance, the need, like, for investments, and look forward to continuing to partner in different ways that we can elevate this. The other thing I will say is that as far as our organizing power and our reach, I wanted to just mention our empathy network. Earlier, I said that we are a little bit of a unicorn in that we are working for racial equity, economic equity, but we also do that at that intersection of social unity and bipartisanship. And so our network actually spans members across all 50 states in Washington, D.C., and we have over 5,000 active members who are not, just on a list, but these are folks who are organizing every year for events. They're turning out to lobby, to host events for us, things like that. And they are in places like Arizona and Michigan and Kentucky and, some of these more purple places. We have very active membership in those places. Many are formerly incarcerated, or friends and family and community allies of folks who've been incarcerated because our criminal justice side of our work. And we think that we can mobilize this cohort basically to help train the trainer on different things, to enroll and reach out to disadvantaged communities for some of the programs that you all will be administering, conduct education, and all of that sort of thing. And so specifically with regard to projects and some of the RFPs that are coming soon or open now, we're also really intentionally partnering not just with blue cities, but looking at how to reach out to more red cities and purple cities, so that we can help ensure that funding for disadvantaged communities that may have a Republican mayor or Republican leadership in that area can also be receiving funding, so that later in our government affairs work, we're able to say, like, actually, here are some of the benefits to these places, and that we can cultivate champions who can say, actually, keep this money flowing.